Hello, I'm Jonathan Baggaley, Chief Executive of the PSHE Association, the national body for personal social health and economic education, and we are delighted to be working with financial education charity Young Money this week to bring you twilight workshops to celebrate Talk Money Week. Over the last couple of days, we've had fantastic sessions looking at successful financial education in primary and secondary schools with some really practical examples of how to use finance as a context for teaching and really effective strategies for ensuring all young people get the financial education that they not only need, but as was really clear from the sessions, they desperately want. For this final session today, we're going to be looking outside the classroom at the ways in which finance and financial experiences young people are having are changing. In all aspects of PSHE, it's crucial that we're responding to young people's current experiences and the way the world they are growing up in is developing. Yet this sometimes gets missed when we think about financial education, despite radical changes that are taking place, such as the emergence of cryptocurrency, the diminishing role of cash in our everyday lives, and the increasing ease with which young people can access opportunities to gamble online. So for this Money Matters session, we're going to be looking at the implications of an increasingly cashless society on young people's perception of the value of money, the challenges of money advice acquired through social media, and the very real impact of gambling and fraud upon children as young as 7 years old. Our session today will be led by Russell Winnard, Director of Programs and Services at Young Money. Young Money is part of the national charity Young Enterprise, which provides resources, training and support to anyone working with young people to develop their financial capability. They have over 20 years experience of working with a wide range of educators to develop and deliver high quality financial education to the young people they work with. Russell began his career as an accountant within the Lloyd's insurance market before moving into teaching, where his time there highlighted the need for all young people to develop the knowledge, skills, and attitudes beyond traditional academic learning, and prompted his decision to join the charitable sector supporting schools to address that. Alongside Russell, to discuss these issues, we're also delighted to be joined by Dr. Elly Hanson and Charlie Plücker. Elly is an independent clinical psychologist and the research director for Fully Human, the PSHE Association's research and development arm. A key focus of her work is supporting the development of good quality PSHE education. And she does this through research with young people, synthesis and analysis of evidence, and developing resources. Elly has researched and written on the subject of gambling and pornography and their implications for young people, parents, and educators, and is currently developing resources for schools aimed at preventing sexual harassment and supporting healthy relationships. Elly also works with law enforcement, social work teams, survivors of abuse, and the voluntary sector in the collective effort to prevent abuse and ameliorate its harms. Charlie has worked in the addiction field for the past 21 years, is a qualified addiction therapist, and is currently UK Partnerships Manager for GamCare's Young People Service. Prior to working for GamCare, he managed the Young People Substance Misuse Services across Kirklees local authority and brings a real depth of experience on the challenges and opportunities facing young people today. It's a delight to have them here, and I'm really looking forward to what I'm sure will be a lively discussion. I'd also like to thank you all for joining us today. I hope you find the session really useful. The Q&A box is open, and we have staff from the PSHE Association and Young Money on hand to answer your questions. We've got quite a few of you with us today, so if we can't get to your questions, don't hesitate to contact us or Young Money afterwards. We'll provide contact details in the chat. And please do, as I can see you are, introduce yourselves and have a really lively, engaging, and no doubt informative discussion. Over to you, Russell. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much, Jono. And welcome, everybody. Welcome, Charlie, and welcome, Dr. Elly. Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Excellent. So this is a really, really exciting session. As Jono just alluded to, we held a session on primary school and financial education within primary schools on Monday. We were looking at how financial education is integrated into primary schools and how it's delivered by teachers and beyond the school. On Tuesday, we were looking at similar things, but in secondary, and the differences that there are about embedding financial education within secondary education. And as a result of both of those sessions, there were topics that were coming up from teachers that we were speaking to as part of those sessions, things that we will cover off today, because this session is all about some of those experiences that young people are having, things that they're getting involved in that they don't necessarily understand, things that you as teachers might be hearing them talk about in tutor groups, in the corridor, in break and lunch, that maybe have slight nuance towards more negative areas that we might want to explore. So I'm thrilled that we have Charlie and Elly here to help us today. And first off, I know Jono gave a little bit of an intro to you, but I just wondered if you could give us a little bit more of an insight into the work that you're involved in. And maybe Dr. Elly, if we go to you first.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the introduction, and such a privilege and honour to be here with you all today. As Jono's intro summarised, I kind of do a medley of things, but I hope and aspire for there to be synergy across them. I guess particularly relevant to today's session, I recently wrote for the PSHE Association a theory and evidence scope looking at gambling prevention education in schools, looking at what research shows us is effective, but also what might be promising inclusions. It's education that's really ripe for development. So it was a good time to be saying, what do we already know? And on the basis of theory, on the basis of what we know about adolescent psychology, education generally, and also looking at how the industry operates, what does that mean for our educational efforts in this space? As Jono mentioned, I've also done work around pornography and the implications of that for young people in education. And there's a lot of connections between the two, actually, and other areas of young people's lives where they are maybe being approached and targeted by industries that are pushing products conducive to harm. So also surveillance advertising. Yeah, there's some overlapping issues across tech at the moment, which I've done work around and can speak to. I think that's probably enough from me at the moment. Over to you, Charlie.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Russell, and for the opportunity to speak to everybody today. So yeah, I work for GamCare. We're a charity that's been going since 1997, supporting individuals affected by gambling-related harm. We run the National Gambling Helpline, and to give you an idea of kind of prevalence, we took over 40,000 calls last year to that from over 27,000 separate callers. We also provide the National Gambling Treatment System across England and Wales. But we recently launched our young people services. We became aware of a gap in our provision, and there was a burgeoning body of evidence showing the prevalence of gambling-related harm to young people. So hence the motivation for starting these services. We've kind of got a two-pronged approach. So we have an education side, which is more of a prevention, and we've delivered workshops to over 12,000 young people directly. And then we also have our support side. So if a young person has run into problems with gambling themselves, we can provide them with support. And if they're affected by a loved one's gambling, or a parent or a guardian's gambling, we can also provide that support for them.
Brilliant. Thank you both for those overviews. Really useful just to get that kind of background. I suppose, Charlie, if I come to you first, the themes you may have noticed around gambling in your work with young people, can you expand on that at all?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I would say that the biggest theme that I've noticed is the lack of knowledge and awareness around gambling-related harm in young people, but also in the professionals working with young people. And I'm not throwing stones about that. You know, myself coming from a substance misuse field, I didn't have this on my radar 5 years ago. However, very keen to try and address that. I think we've become accustomed to asking young people when we assess them about mental health and about alcohol and drug use. We would like to see gambling seen in the same light. I think another theme that we've picked up on, certainly from our support service, is we're seeing a high number of young people with special educational needs access our service, interestingly enough. It's too early to draw data from that, but anecdotally, yeah, that's certainly happening. But also we're seeing a lot of young people access our service that aren't gambling, like I touched on earlier, that are affected by their parents or a guardians or a siblings gambling. And it's fascinating that the harm is very similar to the hidden harm that we've become accustomed to in substance misuse field. We see similar patterns from a gambling perspective. And on the back of that, we're working with social care with a number of families to give them the right support.
Super, thank you. And Elly, are there any themes that are more prevalent around gambling for young people that you may have been made aware of?
Do you mean in terms of harms?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think just picking up on what Charlie said there, I would really resonate with that. And that I think sometimes what's going on with gambling is that, say we're taking another issue like drugs and alcohol, as Charlie just mentioned, the harms there may be more visible. Whereas what we find with gambling is that they are potentially, some of them are quite visible, but some of them are quite subtle and complex and obscured at times. One of them being this harms to other people beyond the individual. But also we have harms such as missed opportunities. So the time spent caught up in gambling isn't being spent maybe in a more social way or playing sport or whatever it may be, in other ways that might be more conducive to that young person's development and well-being. There's also harms around autonomy, and we might talk a bit more about that as we go along, but where young people are gambling and they're feeling a disconnect between that behaviour and actually being in control of their life, having that kind of being in the driving seat, being the author of where they want to go, then that in and of itself is a harm that we should be zooming in on. And obviously there's kind of wider societal harms of gambling, such as inequality, which can get missed when we take too much of an individualistic approach.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that opportunity cost piece that you meant, that's really interesting, because gambling, just by its very nature, it's quite consuming, and therefore you're not able to focus on those other areas which, you know, maybe you ought and would be more productive for you.
Yeah, can I come back on that, Russell?
Of course.
From a safeguarding perspective, yeah, neglect is one of the issues that we pick up on, but also financial harm as well. You know, if a parent or a guardian is gambling and there's a lack of finances in the house, you can appreciate the effect on all the family ultimately. But going back to what Elly said as well, that it is the ultimate silent addiction, and I use that word sparingly. But yeah, with say substance use, there is often signs that you will pick up on. What we tend to find is that people present to our service once they're in absolute crisis, and nobody tends to know about it because they've kept it so hidden. It's the ultimate secret. We're keen to try and get people the help that they need earlier before it reaches crisis point.
Yeah, super.
And just and complementary point to that when we're thinking about gambling harms, it's really important that we hold in mind the whole kind of continuum. That at one end there will be the people that are needing that treatment. They'll be needing Charlie and his team, and then we've got the kind of those people who are engaging in it much less frequently, and it may not feel as much of a problem. But we've got the prevention paradox at work that's important to keep in mind, that that the majority of gambling harms will be experienced by those who will not be categorized as problem gamblers, because they are experienced by a bigger number of people. So this is something that we have to keep in mind across all kind of social problems, that there can be much lower levels of harm, but with a much bigger group of people at that milder end of the spectrum. And we have to keep that in mind alongside the group that are struggling in a more obvious and extreme way. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely it does. And I think in a way that relates a little bit to the next question. I was going to try and begin to contextualize it for some of the people watching who are working with young people day in, day out. I'm sure we've got primary and secondary school teachers here. One of those areas that I know has come up, and it's come up on Monday and Tuesday's webinars, is loot boxes. And these are, well, Charlie, are you able to explain loot boxes far better than I can?
Yeah, I'll certainly try. So these are part of gaming, and these are the in-game purchases that a young person or a person playing the game can make. I would say that the games makers are very keen not to class this as gambling, for obvious reasons, with the legal age being 18. However, we would define gambling as anything that is wagering something of value on an outcome that involves risk or chance. So yeah, I would say that loot boxes are gambling. And certainly we've worked with young people that have run into problems. Interestingly enough as well, we've received a lot of phone calls from parents who have given their bank details to their child to make one purchase, and then suddenly they're found to have a £1,500 bill. That bank details have stayed online, and because of the persuasive nature of loot boxes, the way that they're promoted and advertised, the young person has gone back repeatedly and made these purchases, trying to get, because they don't know what they're going to get from the game. They go back and try to get the one that they want, and this goes on and on.
I think that's the fundamental piece, isn't it? They don't know. They're paying for something that they don't know what they're going to get. It might be something that is amazing and it shoots them to the next level and it advances them in the game. But equally, it might be a useless piece of equipment that does nothing for them. But they didn't know that before they've bought and paid real money for that loot box.
There's another sinister side, Russell, what we're starting to learn more about as well, and that is websites that have been set up abroad. The government tries to shut them down quickly, but what they are is an online casino where a young person can go and trade their loot box purchases and be entered into a casino. The government are very much against it and try and shut it down, but they have difficulty because when they come from places like Russia and China, they're very difficult to control. But certainly young people are talking to us about that. So it's young people are being shown gambling at a very young age, and it's very concerning, certainly.
And some of these are really really young ages. You know, we're talking potentially about 7-8-year-olds that are experiencing this. And Elly, I just wondered what kind of impact does it have on a young person to be engaging in any activity like that I suppose is normalized, because it's part of you're in your home, you're playing a game. It's normalizing something which is promoting, even if it's not classified as gambling, it's promoting a gambling type behavior.
Yeah, and I think that I'm joining Charlie here. Let's just call it gambling. It is gambling. So, I know that the gambling industry and the gaming industry don't want it to be called that, but language is really important here. Sorry, minor kind of tangent, but I think loot boxes are an example of a kind of wider intentional blur that goes on around what's gambling, and these use of the terms gaming and play, games, to actually describe gambling. And so an important part of education and prevention is actually just reclaiming the language around all of this. But yeah, linking back to what you're saying about, young children as young as 7, linking to this point about language, children of that age are not going, obvious point, but they don't have that knowledge that an adolescent might have, or indeed an adult would have, on what the risks might be, on what this actually is. And so it's kind of maybe a form of grooming, we could describe it as, where children are introduced to gambling without the requisite knowledge and skills. They're instructed in how to gamble, and their appetite for it is whet. So you could see it as actually quite manipulative.
And are there any things that we should be looking out for in young people that have started enjoying and experiencing that gambling. Are there any indicators? I know we said it was kind of that hidden. I just wonder if there are indicators that we should be looking for.
Well, I mean, I'm interested in Charlie's thoughts on this. Just some initial thoughts were, you're looking for that kind of compulsive use, you know, that difficulty in unhooking. And, you know, we could say this is true of most young people and screen time, etc. But having those conversations with young people, with children, exploring what they're enjoying online and what they might be less enjoying. And one of the things that we find with across addictions, or whatever the addiction, and again, there's a continuum there of addiction at one end, but less agentic use, just kind of going down that spectrum, is there's a disconnect between wanting to do something and enjoying doing it. So, and this is very much shown in the neuroscience research, that the brain areas responsible for wanting something are lighting up, but when that is received, it's not particularly liked. So wanting and liking become untethered. And that can be something that we can be looking out for, that maybe a young person's really wanting the loot box experience, but then when they have the loot box experience, it's not actually particularly enjoyable. So that's a sign that something's wrong.
Charlie, anything you'd add?
Yeah, I would just say that it's a tough one, because, like we spoke about, there aren't the usual signs that come with say, substance use. I think it will be about ensuring that professional curiosity from a teacher's perspective, or anybody working with young people, noticing a change in something in that young person, maybe a preoccupation or a change in mood, or something that's not the same as it was before. And that's not to say that there's a gambling problem, but I think that's where that professional curiosity comes in, and to have the confidence to be able to ask those questions. And certainly our training has been developed specifically for that. So people, professionals working with young people, leave sessions feeling more confident to be able to have that discussion, how to start that discussion, but also what to do when they've discovered it, and how to access the right support for that young person.
Super. Thank you. I'm going to pick up on another area as well, because this cropped up, and it was only in the secondary one. It was not in the primary webinar, but the issue of cryptocurrency. And we had in the chat, and I can see there's lots of chat going on, but in the chat we had a number of teachers saying, I'm hearing that some of my students are investing in inverted commas, investing in cryptocurrency, and there's concern around that. Just your views on cryptocurrency. Is cryptocurrency gambling, Charlie?
I'll come out. I mean, I would say it's a form of gambling, certainly. Yeah, it has an element of risk, it has an element of chance, and you're wagering something of value against that. That's not to say that everybody investing in cryptocurrency will develop problems, but we're certainly working with a number of young people that have run into problems. And I think that for me, it's more the perception of a get-rich-quick perception that's the problem. And I think it's not about telling young people not to do this. I think it's about giving them the right information, not what they've learned from their friends or online, but the right information so that they can make more informed choices about whether they want to get involved in that or not.
I think that's a really, really important comment there. It's giving young people the whole picture and allowing them to make that informed decision. It's about willingnesses to take risks, but understanding that risk is absolutely important. Elly, I know one of the problems with cryptocurrency in particular is the level of peer influence that there is around it. As Charlie mentioned, as this kind of get rich quick, all the focus being on the positive, hardly any focus being on the negative, and social media is a big driver of that. And I just wonder how much of an influence on other areas of gambling, etc., do we see coming from peers and from social media and maybe even close family in some cases?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think research shows that all of those, all of those areas can be influencing, and then obviously then combine it with advertising, and what that young person can then be experiencing is a message from one or more of those groups that is biased, that is saying this is more profitable than it actually is, and that there's less risk than there actually, and there's not just less risk but greater benefit than there is. And so a big part of what we can be doing in education, if I jump onto that, is just very straightforward education on, number one, what is gambling, and including these new forms and helping young people to explore, well, what do we think of cryptocurrency? And actually that sense of there being a continuum. It's not just that's clearly gambling over here, betting on a sports game, and crypto isn't. That there is a spectrum, and these things have some commonalities. But then also looking at what the harms might be, but also moderating the perceived benefits, because sometimes that's the problem. And we know from adolescent research that in conditions of risk, young people are potentially less motivated by to change their behaviour by high risk, more than low benefit. Mm-hmm. So actually focusing on this isn't as beneficial as you think it might be, maybe more effective than focusing on there's all of these risks.
Yeah,
if that makes any sense. But I think also, just picking up on your point about peer influence and peer approval, another promising direction of travel in education is a social norms intervention, where, I mean, we have to be a bit careful here, because sometimes this only really works where young people are perceiving that more of their friends are gambling than they really are, and more of their friends approve of gambling than they really do. But there is evidence to suggest that often young people are having these misconceptions. So they assume higher levels of engagement and higher levels of approval, which is then pushing their behaviour. So teachers can actually do a kind of bespoke survey to actually gather what are young people doing? What do they think about gambling? And if they're finding a bit of a mismatch between what young people think of their peers and what's actually going on, and their peers are approving less and they're less involved, then educating around that mismatch can be very powerful. Yeah,
and I think part of that role that we can play as educators is bringing about that conversation, isn't it? Bringing about what actually is real, and not allow or enable those influences that are very, very positive. It's normalizing that kind of conversation, and we're in Talk Money Week this week. This week is Talk Money Week, and I think that is a really good example of why we should be talking about these issues and normalizing something which a young person may not be quite on the right end of the spectrum.
Just to come back on that, but from a peer perspective, it's really interesting that the young people that access our services, some of them talk about friends that have had big wins. And it's a very selective way of looking at that. They don't talk about the big losses, but they've all, predominantly have got a tale to tell about a friend that have won so much money, and that seems to be a motivation in some of the young people.
Definitely. There's some interesting comments going on in the chat. I don't know if everyone can see that, but I just wanted to pick up on one in particular. Nick, who I think may have joined the webinar yesterday as well, sharing that there are Year 11 students who are checking their cryptocurrency values and sharing it with their peers. But then he's gone on to say that as a computer science teacher, as well as PSHE, it's important that we teach students about the positives of blockchain technology, which, that's how Bitcoin and the like, how they're moved around, and that security. There are positives. It's not saying that the whole of cryptocurrency is a bad thing, and there may be technologies, there may even be good applications of a cryptocurrency, but it's just that awareness raising, isn't it? That the level of risk that we've got.
Yeah, I mean, just coming in on that, and I'm not an expert on crypto and blockchain. I think in terms of what I would know about it, and this is maybe my own, how I would make my own decision making and what values I hold, from what my understanding is that there are some big there's a huge carbon footprint to it. So for me personally, that is trumping any positives. As we speak, COP26, actually, if we shouldn't be developing technologies that are costing more to the climate right now. But that's, and I think that just needs to be part of the, going with the grain of what you're saying, informed decision making, and that just needs to be part of that information about crypto that is often missing.
Exactly, and I think it is quite difficult to understand and get your head around how cryptocurrency actually works, and if you don't understand that, then you are even less informed as well. So you are gambling in essence, because you don't understand what's influencing those prices, or how that currency's come about, or the mining of Bitcoin, etc., or other cryptocurrencies. I wanted to just move away a little bit from gambling just for a moment, and to focus on an area which I know is of concern, I think, as to how young people learn about money in the first instance, because we've moved quite significantly towards a kind of cashless society over the last couple of years, and over the last 2 years really quickly because of the need to due to COVID. And that means that young people, very young people in some cases, 3-4 years old, and what they're observing in terms of money transactions are actually not tangible use of cash. They're tapping on a machine, or they're paying with a mobile phone, and there is a concern that that's beginning to have an impact on how young people start their learning journey around money. And I just wondered, maybe Elly, to come to you first, what you thought about that, and how you see that translating into how a young person perceives money and transactions.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not aware of too much research on this topic. Like you say, it's really new and emerging, but we can certainly have some hypotheses that it may make it harder, without those tangibles, harder for children to develop that understanding of what's actually going on with money and how it works. And then when we come to think about things like gambling, money feeling less real, and losses feeling less real potentially. So there might be something in education, and it's already going on within maths lessons, etc., but more of an emphasis on actually making money tangible, because we need to now, because that's not happening just every day, accompanying your parent to the shop,
Exactly. It's added an extra step into what we have to think about as educators, whoever the educator is, because it could well be the parent or carer. But if you are just tapping for something or using your mobile phone, we now have to have that additional step of, this is what's actually happening. This is money that I've earned in most cases, and it is being sent to the shop, but you're just not seeing it anymore. It's intangible.
Yes.
Charlie, was there anything you wanted to?
Nothing much to add to what Elly said, really, but tangible, I think, is the important word. Certainly the young people that we work with tell us that when they're online, they're just numbers on a screen. It's not the actual value of the money, and that value of the money, that handing over of the money, is the step that's lost when it's online. So yeah, from my perspective, yeah, young people just don't see it as money; they just see it as numbers.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and actually, it's made me think of I'll not say the brand name, but that there are buy now, pay later applications now for many things, and actually they do appear to be targeted at young people. I know they would say that they're not, but they tend to be on clothing websites, etc., where you instantly get the option to click on the buy now, and you pay over 3 monthly installments, and it's 0%. But the minute you don't pay back your installments, then you end up paying a whole lot more. And I suppose that's the same principle, isn't it? We're giving young people the opportunity not to pay for that thing right there and then, on the understanding that they do put their money aside and they pay it back in those 3 installments. But if they don't, then there are consequences, and it's very easy to not pay for something. It's a lot harder to make sure that you've got that money for those 3 installments later on.
Absolutely. And I think that, we have to be, you're absolutely right, Russell, that this is related to gambling, although it's not gambling. That, as Charlie was saying, that get rich quick, it's the same principle of have something without paying for it. And it is the sea in which young people are swimming. And that feels inherently problematic, that young people, just to live life, are being bombarded with these, to put it mildly, invitations to live like that. And I mean, there was a good Guardian article on the company that you're talking about, where, it's actually promoted as a way of buying, first and foremost, before just paying for it normally there and then, without that information being upfront about how much interest if you don't pay back.
Yes.
There's a wider theme here as well about young people being bombarded with invitations to value extrinsic things, so that get rich, to place a lot of emphasis and worth on being rich, on status, on fame, on appearance. And there's a really wide body of research on that, showing that if when we hold extrinsic values more closely, that's bad for our mental health, that's bad for our relationships, and it's bad for the planet. And the more we focus on those things, the less emphasis we give to the more intrinsic values like connection and care, and personal growth. And so there is a real problem here. And again, education can help in terms of creating that protected space for young people to really think, well, what do I care about? Which can then be a ballast to these relentless invitations to place value on extrinsic markers.
Yeah. If we apply that from addiction perspective as well, there's some fascinating parallels there, because it's instant gratification. It's I want it and I want it now, and it's feeding into that almost creating a perfect storm from an addiction perspective. Yeah,
it's very true, and I think the biggest challenge with the buy now pay later is the accessibility of it. It's literally there at the checkout, just before you were about to pay, and it gives you an option not to pay. I mean, it's not as if you have to go and think about, or I'll go and put a loan application in or something like that. It's instant, and yeah, I can see those parallels, Charlie, really, really clearly. It's difficult to know, isn't it, that what we can do and how do we best support young people with this? And Elly, you alluded to that having those conversations, making sure that we've got that balance, that equilibrium right. Is there any other advice that you might give to teachers watching this today who may be thinking that I need to do more to kind of address some of these issues in the classroom and do that normalization process? Any kind of advice or tips that you would give?
Yeah, I mean, and I would also just flag at this point a shameless plug for the paper I wrote on this, which has 6 areas that could be usefully covered, some of which are very gambling specific, and some are kind of wider bedrock PSHE, and also the PSHE Association has a great kind of handbook on addressing gambling through education. But yeah, just to kind of highlight a couple of things that I haven't mentioned thus far. there is something really important about, and we can do some of this through maths, through not just through PSHE lessons specifically, but relevant mathematical concepts such as randomness, probability, and odds. Really ensuring that young people have a good grasp of how that works to counteract things like the gambler's fallacy, i.e. the kind of illusion that because there's been 6 blacks, it's more likely there's going to be a red, when actually there isn't. We know that education, that thorough kind of grounding in relevant maths, and all of maths should be looking for opportunities to make it of real world relevance. So it could be win for maths and win for gambling prevention education, and tackling also superstitious thinking. It can be very powerful, and we've got research showing that that kind of an intervention does reduce problems with gambling. And then something else that, I mean, Charlie and I have spoken in conversation about, another area of education is teaching a variety of ways of kind of managing emotions. So that's another part of PSHE, but that being really important because we know that gambling, like other behaviours that might be harmful, such as watching pornography, drugs and alcohol, etc. And I'm not saying that all of these things are problems all of the time, but when they do become problems, it's often because they're being used as a way to cope with difficult solutions. And so what's really useful is that building blocks on how can we when something difficult happens, how can we cope with that in a way that's more adaptive?
Yeah. Can I just come back on that, Russell? Yeah. Well, to pick up on what Elly was saying there, just to expand on it a little bit. I think there's a danger in maybe leaving this webinar thinking that young people get involved in gambling purely for financial gain. And I'm sure that's a factor for many young people. However, like Elly's alluded to, we worked with a neuroscientist and we did some experiments. People were under an MRI scan while they were involved in gambling activity. And what the MRI scan showed was that it's working on the reward pathway. So it's working on dopamine, the same as drugs and alcohol, the same as cannabis, the same as alcohol. So for a young person now, some young people are using gambling as a coping mechanism because of the dopamine that's released. And the Gambling Commission have done a study on this, and I think that it's something like 18% of young people who gambled more when they were worried or concerned about something. So if we're talking about risk factors or signs, I think that's something to be aware of and not to maybe presume that it's all about financial gain. There's other benefits for young people in gambling, and that is an alternative coping mechanism, albeit a negative one.
No, that's really useful to know. And it makes perfect sense, doesn't it, when you think about it, and to watch out for those young people who've got some of those emotional challenges, because it may be that they look to gambling to support that. I just wanted to come to you, Charlie, regards any further support or advice from GamCare that you're able to provide to teachers.
I will give another shameless plug if that's all right.
Sure.
Yeah, we can provide education workshops directly to young people. We can provide them also to the professionals working with young people. They're free, the CPD accredited. We're doing this purely because we want to raise awareness and knowledge around this area. And the sessions are designed so hopefully people leave those sessions feeling more confident to have those discussions and to be able to be aware of the signs. And something that we maybe haven't touched on, that something me and Elly spoke about as well, is the training and education sessions focus on advertising as well, and the powerful advertising and the number of psychologists that are involved in advertising who know which buttons to press in young people, which are very, very persuasive to a young person. So yeah, I would encourage people to access that training, of course. Yeah.
Super. Well, that concludes our webinar, and suffice to say, just a massive thank you to you both, Elly and Charlie. A huge thank you for everyone that's joined. There was an awful lot of information there, and I'm sure that if there's more that you would like to find out, PSHE Association website, there's information, and there are people that you can get in touch with there. the Young Money website for more financial education related materials and advice. There are people there that can speak to you through the advisory service line. But I hope that this has been interesting and useful. I can see that Elly's paper has also been shared in the chat. If anyone would like to download, have a look at Elly's paper, you can get it through the link there. But thanks for joining us, and have a wonderful evening. Thanks.
Thank you.